with an overactive imagination. Well, it's the best place for me to tell it. I can't get into trouble because, I guess, it's a story. This is the only place I can reach out to. Right, I'll start from the beginning. I'm going to change the names of the characters and cast members to remain anonymous so this can't be traced back to me. The character I play is called Katie Parker. I've been playing her for almost 3 years. Katie was my first real acting gig. I've been cast in movies and shows before, but Katie was my way into real fame. I've met some great people since then, and my castmates are like my second family. Katie was the reason I moved to LA and took a chance on what I thought would be a small role. The show wasn't expected to get so big, but before I knew it, I was attending press days and going to my first ever Teen Choice Awards and San Diego Comic-Con. It was crazy, surreal. I could work with my best friends and earn money for doing what I loved. It all seemed like a dream come true. And it was, at least for the first few years. I loved the show. It was something I could believe in. I connected so well to Katie because she suffered with the same problems as me, anxiety, depression. The show from the start wanted to be different, and I respected that. It wanted to take elements from other TV dramas and mix them together, creating something brand new and innovative, and it worked. Our head writers were brothers, collaboratively working on the show. They were passionate about the plot and characters, especially Katie, and often let me have creative input, which allowed me to connect to my character properly, which made it easier to play her. Now, if I'm honest, I felt like I was playing myself. Trouble arose when we finished season 1. Again, we didn't know the show was going to go so well. Our writers had a perfect ending, which tied up all the loose ends. We'd already filmed it, and despite adoring Katie, I was happy with the ending. Part of me was praying for a season 2, but we all collaboratively agreed our initial ending was great. I remember we all went out for a cast meal, and the subject came up. Season 2. We were all definitely hoping for one, and knew the writers had ideas if we were greenlit. At that point, I was practically high on the thought of another season, and who could have blamed me? Another 13 whole episodes to film with my best friends. It was the dream. And weeks later, we were commissioned for season 2. I can't put into words how happy I was. I remember being at home when it was announced, and I screamed. I just screamed and screamed until my parents, who I was visiting at the time, asked me if I was okay. The next few months went by in a blur. I was blown away at how big our show had gotten. People came up to me at the airport, calling me Katie. It was crazy, like I was living this insane dream. Season 2 was different. Though I was expecting it, I did notice the writing had gotten lazy though. Katie's storylines went from normal problems to progressively more bizarre plots that I could no longer relate to. It reached a point when Katie became a separate person altogether, and playing her started to make me feel uncomfortable. Our fans started to notice the deteriorating writing, and then our show began its downward spiral. The writers were writing for shock value instead of actual engaging plot. We were left baffled and couldn't say anything because we weren't allowed. At the end of season 2, it only got more and more insane, which again made sense. The whole point of the show was to be different, but the writers took it to a whole other level. Season 3 is where everything kind of blew up in my face. I wasn't excited to be greenlit for another season. None of us were. The spark had gone, and the show was starting to gain attention for how crazy it had gotten. My friends and family started asking questions, and they urged me to quit. Well, as far as they were concerned, the show was a joke, as were myself and the other cast members. We became a joke. People weren't laughing with us, they were laughing at us. At characters we'd worked so hard to make real, only for the writers to make them barely recognizable. It was infuriating, but I wasn't allowed to speak out. If I liked a post on Instagram which was making fun of the show, I get non-stop texts telling me to unlike it before the fans caught wind of my true feelings. Yes, I was contracted to defend it, so I did. In every interview I made sure to speak only good things about Katie, even when her character was as good as dead to me. I ignored the skeptical look on interviewers' faces when I told them how much I loved the show and characters, and made sure I smiled. We were told that so many times it was practically drilled into us. We had to smile. But I didn't want to smile. I knew our fans were wondering if I was okay, because in almost every photo I looked tired and fed up. The others were the same, and that thought kept me sane. For every nauseating question I'd be asked about Katie's sex life, we'd exchange discreet rolled eyes and secret smiles. Throughout the day I kept getting the overwhelming urge to stand up and leave, and never go back. But I kept going because part of me was still holding on to faith that the show would get better. I had fallen in love with it after all. Plus, I was with my best friends. I didn't want to quit the show and leave them. Even if Katie, as well as the show itself, were emotionally draining me, we started season 3 like normal. But obviously this year it was different. Comic-Con didn't happen because of the pandemic, though there were small press appearances with social distancing measures in place. I spent a lot of time with my family over the summer and didn't travel at all, so when it came to heading back to film after giving the go-ahead, I was excited to see the others. I knew the show was still a mess, but working with them was something I loved to do, regardless of bad writing. Things were different, however. I knew as soon as I arrived that the atmosphere in the writer's room was stifling. When I sat down, I almost felt suffocated. We'd already had script meetings on Zoom, and they seemed to go fine. But as soon as I stepped foot inside, something was wrong. The secondary cast members were absent, which already set off alarm bells in my head. Normally everyone was present for script read-throughs, so when it was just the 5 of us, surrounded by writers and crew members, I felt like I was in a lion's den. They were all stony-faced, and I immediately thought I'd done something wrong. Our head writer, James Marley, was sitting at the head of the table, a long rectangle we all gathered around for our first in-person script reads. His brother, Derek, was nowhere to be seen. I later found out that Derek had quit the show over so-called creative differences. Normally, everyone would be talking animatedly and laughing, but our writers were silent. My castmates sat around me, looking uncomfortable. The night before, we gathered at another cast member, Noah's apartment. We talked about the show, and after exchanging stories about how absurd our characters had become, we agreed we'd leave if it got worse. The show was ruining any chance of a serious career for any of us. There were 5 of us that night, me and Noah, who plays my on-screen love interest on the show, as well as Izzy, Rory, and Lana. They play 3 other main characters. Noah declared that as a cast, we were done. If the writing continued to deteriorate, and I knew it would, we were going to leave together. Noah said he knew people who could easily get us out of the contract, so we thought we didn't have to worry about that, though I was still skeptical, and it seemed unlikely he'd know people high enough to take down TV executives, but I trusted him. We kept our decision to leave the show under wraps. If the writers and producers found out, we'd be in trouble. No matter how much I hated the show at that point, fans still loved it. They still loved Katie, and if we left, that meant them finding new cast members. I didn't want to upset anyone, especially our fans, but being there was driving me insane. I couldn't look at another script and let them ruin Katie even more. So, we were sitting around the writer's table, and I was sweating bad. I didn't know if I was getting sick or just anxious, but my hands were clammy around my script. Part of me wondered if somehow the writers had caught on to our pact. Though, that was crazy, right? It was just the 5 of us hanging out. I got my answer when James spoke up, giving me a condescending nod across the table. His voice was no longer friendly, more of a growl. He asked me where I was planning on going when I left the show. I was speechless. Had one of the other cast members told him? I knew they wouldn't have, so how did he know? My heart was pounding, and it no longer felt like a script read-through. It was an interrogation. Rory jumped up to go to the bathroom, no doubt to escape the awkwardness, but he was ushered back to his seat. I should have noticed that. The way they manhandled my friend, shoving him back into his spot next to Izzy. Maybe then I might have realized that something was seriously wrong, that we needed to get the hell out of there. But I could feel a panic attack brewing. My heart was doing acrobatics, and I felt like I couldn't breathe, like all the breath had been sucked out from my lungs. I stared down at my script and read over the same highlighted line over and over again until my eyes were blurring with tears. I couldn't bring myself to look up and face him, which was crazy. James had always felt like a friend, so why was he acting like that? From the corner of my eye, Izzy was reaching over to comfort me, but James snapped at her, telling the girl to leave me alone. Noah looked like he was going to step in, but I somehow managed to coax words out from my throat. That was the moment I had a chance to leave. At least, I thought I did. The words were tangled in my throat, but I couldn't say them. I was too scared. So I told James I didn't know what he was talking about. It was all I could say. My throat was dry like sandpaper, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Instead of interrogating me further, he asked us to hand over our phones, which was like a kick in the gut. I used Instagram a lot to document long nights of filmings or hanging out with the others. It was harmful playing around. I didn't understand why he wanted them. Twisting around in my chair, I noticed the only door was blocked. The others noticed this too, but they just gave us some lame excuse, explaining it was so we could concentrate fully on the script. Bullshit, Noah had argued, but he was ignored. When we refused to give them our phones, our contracts were brought up, and we were threatened. What with, I'm not sure. James spoke in such a convoluted way I couldn't understand what he was saying. Or maybe that was the point. He sounded like he was talking in tongues and went through each section of our contract with his vindictive smile I don't think I'll ever get out of my head. He was triumphant, and looking around at my castmates, I knew we were fighting a losing battle. The threats worked. With every single person in that room against us, we stood down. We handed over our phones, and that was their first step in taking control of our lives. It sounds stupid that something as small as handing over your phone can change everything, but I had no idea what doing that would do. I'd let go of my one connection to our fans, as well as my family and friends. Initially, it was just small things that changed. We weren't allowed our phones, and our social medias were taken over. The passwords changed. I figured that was in case we went live and told everyone we were planning on leaving. I tried several times to try the forget your password trick, but the account had been set to a different email address. My manager was quiet, so I guess she was on their side. Though I'm not surprised, she was good friends with James. Before they took my phone, I texted her that I wanted to leave, and she read it but didn't reply. So we were on our own with crumbling resources. But things weren't overly bad at that point. Despite knowing it was a bad idea to speak out, we planned to go to every media outlet we could think of and report them for threatening us, as well as giving us shady contracts. Lana argued that it was impossible, that it would be our word against theirs, but Noah was insistent. He said if we made it public, then the fans would side with us. I believed him. Our fans are passionate about the show, so I crossed my fingers. Weeks went by, and I started to notice a change on set, even if I was expecting it. The following script read-throughs had been painfully awkward. It wasn't just the phone thing, as well as getting our socials hijacked. I felt like I was being forced to play this character now. Set life was no longer fun. It was draining, and all I seemed to get was passive-aggressive smiles from crew members I knew hated me. It's weird. It's like James had cast a spell across set, making sure everyone I walked past sneered at me or made some backhanded comment about the five of us being difficult. I used to be friendly with them. I used to share my lunch with them and make jokes, but I found myself avoiding them now at all costs. I hid away in my trailer a lot. With no phone and laptop, which they also took away, I was bored. So I read books in between shoots. I used to visit the others, but they always separated us, making sure we couldn't talk to each other. I wanted to see Izzy. She'd be trapped in hair and makeup, and the boys would be on set. I tried multiple times to talk to secondary cast members, and sure, they nodded and smiled, but it's like they weren't listening to me. Like my words were going in one ear and straight out the other. The crew knew we didn't want to be there, so they treated us differently, even if we happened to be the main cast. And it was discreet, so no other cast members caught on, but it was the type of low-key bullying that I'd seen at high school. They'd talk behind my back, or even in front of my face, trying to gaslight me into thinking I was the one in the wrong. That I was some spoiled brat who was throwing a fit because the show wasn't going the way I wanted. I decided I was going to quit, regardless of what James threatened us with. I didn't care anymore. I just wanted to go home and forget everything. Forget the show and Katie, like it was all a bad dream. The others were going to come with me. Rory's the youngest out of us. He's from England, so he and the others were going to stay at my parents' for a while, at least until we figured things out. I hadn't told my parents yet, but they knew I was heading over for Thanksgiving, which was only a few months away. I knew they'd be fine with extra guests. Well, they've met my castmates before, and I knew they were happy to self-isolate at my parents' house. Better than staying. And so, the 5 of us figured out a plan. We decided to go to a well-known entertainment tabloid and tell them everything, including the mistreatment and threats. When it was out there, broadcast, we would be free. At least, that's what I thought. I remember that day being boiling hot. There was no breeze and the humidity made my skin crawl. The air was dry, and on our usual 10-hour shoot, I was barely keeping it together. I had to wear a thick sweater in 90-degree heat, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I was thirsty, but was rarely allowed to have a drink of water, despite my voice croaking. After the shoot, I was anticipating finally being able to tell our story. It was driving me nuts being on set, feeling judgmental eyes on me. Being general assholes was something I thought I could deal with one more time, but refusing to let me drink water was just cruel and petty. It wasn't just me. The crew made sure to make all of our lives a misery. Izzy was fat-shamed in front of everyone. James told her to lose weight, or her character would start losing sexual appeal. They gave her smaller-sized dresses during fittings and chastised her when she couldn't fit into a skirt. Izzy didn't fight back, she just stood there and took the abuse, nodding in all the right places. She tearfully agreed that she needed to go on a diet. So, enough was enough. We were going to expose the show and get our lives back. I was no longer scared I was overreacting or paranoid. It was clear the show only cared about the characters. Katie was like gold to them, and I was nothing. The night we were going to start putting our plan into action, I felt sick with nerves. I got changed at the end of the shoot and grabbed my stuff, heading out to meet the others. The night prior, Noah said he was going to use a friend's Instagram account to reach out to the tabloid. I know what you're thinking. We could have easily gotten a new phone each, but it's our accounts that labelled us official. If we made new ones, they'd be taken down. We spend all day on set, so it's easier for them to keep tabs on us. But Noah managed to get in touch with a friend. He didn't say the details, just that he needed a verified account. Even if they didn't believe us, we would definitely be headline news. Heading out to the parking lot, I expected to see the usual. Noah and Rory sitting on the far wall, feet dangling, sharing a cigarette between them, and Lana and Izzy talking quietly together. Our usual routine was to get an Uber back to the apartment building. Since they took our phones, the show usually got us a ride. But that night, there was no sign of the others. I figured I'd wait for them. It wasn't out of the line of possibility that they were all still on set. It was a cool night, so I paced the parking lot. Without my phone to listen to music, I was bored. My legs were aching. I was in a daze, thinking of the best and worst case scenarios of our plan in my mind. That's when I heard footsteps. I turned around with a smile, expecting to see my castmates. I hadn't gotten a proper chance to speak to them all day, so I was itching to just talk to them and go over the plan. On set, they were the only people who made me feel safe and kept my sanity in check. Except, It wasn't them. Instead of my 4 friends, I was staring at James. His smile was nauseating, but I forced myself to greet him. "Robin," he said, and gave me a curt nod. I smiled back, hoping a simple greeting would send him away, but he seemed overly happy about something. His eyes were glittering, a smirk pulling at his lips. James commented about the weather, and I nodded along, hoping he'd go away, hoping the others would appear. But they didn't. They were nowhere to be seen, and I was starting to realize they weren't coming. And from the look on his face, he knew I was panicking. My hands were jittering, so I shoved them in my jean pockets. He stayed silent for a whole minute, and I was sure I was going to pass out. I was convinced he was doing it on purpose. "Are you waiting for an Uber?" he asked. James didn't lose his smile. I told him I was, and he started laughing, like I just told him a joke. "I didn't call one tonight," he said. My stomach twisted. "What?" James smiled, but there was no warmth in it. He shook his head like I was a child acting out. "You'll be staying somewhere else tonight. We've made alternative arrangements." He said it cheerily, but there was something in his tone which told me I had no choice. And I didn't. My parents lived 3,000 miles away. I had no phone, and my castmates had disappeared. I found myself nodding, even when burning bile was crawling at my throat. I wanted to ask where the others were, but James didn't seem inclined to tell me. The writer told me to grab my stuff, which was just my bag and jacket, and follow him to his car. I did, swallowing the urge to ask him where the others were. My heart was stampeding in my chest, and my mind was in overdrive. Did I start crying out for help? No, that's ridiculous. Anyone else would perceive what was happening as completely normal. James was giving me a ride to these so-called alternative arrangements, but I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't helping that I still had no idea where my castmates were. We'd gone over every possible obstacle, every chance of something going wrong, whether it was big or small. All day we'd communicated through nods and winks, silently sealing the deal. It didn't make sense that they would just disappear. The second I jumped into the back seat of his car, I knew James was aware of our plan, and he would stop at nothing to keep our mouths shut. The car ride was short, and I remember trying to figure out a way to dive out when he stopped the car and just run for it. I had a $20 note in my pocket. That's it. I'd left the rest of my belongings, like my credit card and purse, at home. The 20 was originally for something to eat, but I was barely allowed a break between shoots. Grasping the money in my fist, I knew the 20 would get me a cab fare to the city centre. From there, I go to the police station and tell them everything. The area where we film is fairly remote, and I quickly realized James was going in an opposite direction to the city centre. I started to panic, especially when he sent me knowing glances through the mirror. He knew exactly where the other cast members were, and seeing me squirm was giving him a sickening satisfaction. "The others," I finally managed to choke out, when I twisted in my seat and saw only darkness through the window. There were barely any streetlights, and I couldn't stop myself. It was like word vomit. "Where are they?" James didn't answer for a moment, and when I was sure I was going to throw up, he chuckled. "You're shaking." His voice was like splintered ice. "I don't know why you're sitting there acting like I'm driving you to your death. Pull yourself together." Gaining confidence, I sat up straight. "Where are you taking me?" I asked in a steady voice. "Where are the others?" "Others?" James switched on the radio and cranked it up, swaying in his seat to a slow song crackling through the speakers. He was playing mind games. "Yes, the others," I said sharply. "What did you do to them?" His gaze didn't leave the road. "They're sick," he murmured. "Not the virus, I'm sure of it. The disease is inside their head, and I've sent them away to get better. Something cold slithered down my spine. Sick? My brain whirred with questions. What disease? What was he talking about? Yes. He tapped the steering wheel and my head started to pound. My cheeks felt like they were burning. Maybe I was sick. My stomach had been galloping all day. Like you, Robin. The 5 of you have been showing symptoms all week, but we figured tonight would be the best time to send you to a place where you can get better. Symptoms? Was all I could say with the gutter of my throat. What symptoms? Don't you worry about that right now, Robin, he hummed. We're going to make you better. After all, we can't have you spewing your rambling delusions online, can we? Before I could speak, he continued. His fingers were turning white, gripping the steering wheel. It's okay, Robin. We're going to help you. You don't want to embarrass yourself. No. I wanted to scream at him, but I felt like I was paralyzed. He was making out like I was crazy, like we were all crazy for wanting to leave the show. All of this because of a TV show. All because of Katie. That's all he wanted. James wanted Katie. I didn't cry. Crying would look pathetic. Crying would only add fuel to his fire that I was crazy. I want to go home. The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. I felt like a child, but I was scared. I was so fucking scared. James didn't reply after that, and I was left to my thoughts. My plan to make a run for it had fallen through. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no way I could find a cab at this time of night, and I had no phone, no way to contact anyone. When James parked outside what looked like a run-down hotel, I pressed my face against the window, considering using my bag as a makeshift weapon. The place loomed over me, a silhouette of a dark building. The only light was a sign on the front, the name written in neon purple cursive. I was ushered out of the car before I could try and attempt to break away. James kept a firm hold on my arm. When I tugged it, telling him to let me go, he assured me it was for my own safety, so I didn't hurt myself. I asked questions, but they were all ignored. The hotel reception wasn't much of anything, a small room with bright yellow walls and a sitting area where, ironically, reruns of our show were playing. A tired-looking man in a suit behind a desk fell into conversation with James. I tried to listen in, but they spoke in hissed whispers I could barely understand. I heard our names, all 5 of us. After 10 minutes of me dazedly watching my character Katie run through a forest, chased by a man in a mask, James grabbed my shoulder and pulled me towards a set of brown mahogany doors, and then up carpeted stairs. The place looked abandoned, like we were the only ones inside. I was taken up 3 flights of stairs and pulled down a narrow hallway with the same sickly yellow paint peeling off the walls. I was shoved inside the first room, and before I could turn around and try and dive past him, James was slamming the door in my face. The sound of a lock clicking into place sent my heart into my throat. The room was tiny and box-like, with the same paintwork. There were 2 single beds, and sitting on one of them was Rory. He'd previously had his head planted in his lap and looked up sharply. His eyes were swollen. He'd been crying. "Robs!" We hugged. I asked him what the hell was going on. He had no idea. James had taken him and the others before me. When I asked where Noah, Izzy and Lana were, he shook his head with a frown. No clue. His accent felt warm and familiar, something I needed. Rory then explained that James had told him and the others the same thing, that they were sick and needed help. He also said the windows were locked and the phone on the bedside cupboard had been disconnected. There was no way we could reach the outside world. That night, I slept. The bed was small and I could barely fit on it, but I was so tired I didn't care. I don't know how I managed to fall asleep, though. I was exhausted from the shoot, but my brain wouldn't shut up, and James's words played like a stuck record in my head. Before I knew it, the windows were flooded with sunlight, and Rory was standing over me, shaking me. I got up quickly, only to find James standing in the doorway. In his hands were 2 glasses of water. Rory made sure to greet him with verbal abuse, which I was thankful for. I was barely awake and couldn't string 2 words together. "Colourful," James said, smirking at my castmate. The boy was practically vibrating with fury next to me. Though I'm not surprised. Rory has ADHD, so he's prone to flying off the handle. "I'm here to take you to set." James looked fresh in a brand new suit, while we were in yesterday's sweats. Must have seen my expression. "Oh no, don't you worry. I've got clothes ready downstairs and breakfast is on its way. I've ordered McDonald's." My mouth watered at the thought of food after barely eating anything the day before. Before I forget, it's mandatory that you both take these." Setting the glasses of water on the bedside table, James pulled something out of his pocket. Holding it up to the light, I squinted. It was a tiny blue pill. Whatever appetite I garnered at the thought of breakfast bled away. My chest tightened. "For your condition," he said when none of us moved. Rory sputtered, breaking the silence. "You're kidding, right?" James shook his head, maintaining a wide smile. "It's for your health. Take the pill voluntarily or we'll have to take some appropriate measures." He strode over to Rory and dropped the pill into the boy's hand, and then mine. This time his eyes were hard. "Take it." We had no choice. With James stood there watching us intently, I gave in and popped the pill into my mouth, taking a sip of water. It didn't taste of anything, and I had to swallow twice because it got lodged in the back of my throat. After a moment, Rory took his too. Neither of us wanted to, but it was either we did so, or James was true to his word and enforced appropriate measures, which I was sure was going to be him forcing it down our throat. After we took the pill, I expected side effects, but nothing happened. It wasn't until I was on set when I started feeling weird. I can't explain it. I've been on mental health meds before, and I know the side effects can make you tired and dazed. I felt similar to that, but a lot worse. It was like being in a trance. The hours of the day blurred together, and I could barely remember talking to anyone, or the conversations I'd had. It was a mess in my head. Even now, after 2 days of not taking it, my head still feels foggy. Though I did notice one thing. Through the fog, a coherent thought began to bloom inside my mind. Noah wasn't on set. He wasn't anywhere. I'd seen Izzy and Lana, but I can't remember talking to them. This is their way of shutting us up and stopping us from leaving the show. Drugging us heavily. 2 days ago, James came in with the same pill. Rory took his like normal. I hid mine under my tongue and faked swallowing it. James fell for it, and my head is starting to clear up now. I've seen the effects of the pill on Rory, though. It turns us into zombies. Rory still talks to me, but most of the time it's senseless rambling that, makes no sense. He told me to post on here, though, and so I am. Noah is still missing, but I know if I ask about him, they'll know I'm sober. They'll know I'm not taking the pill. I'm not risking it. I'm going to clear my head completely, and then find Noah. I managed to get this phone from the prop department. They have a bag of old and new iPhones. There's no cellular service, though. I can only get Wi-Fi. Look, if I can, I'll update you in a few days. I'm waiting for the pill to completely wear off. I need to think straight. I need to find Noah and get us all the hell out of here. Part 2. There's something wrong with my castmates. When I was clear-headed enough to think straight, it was the first thing I tried, getting Rory to stop taking the pills. But Rory is past saving. He'd been taking it for a while before I snapped out of it, so telling him to stop was like talking to a brick wall. He just looked at me with glassy eyes, and I knew his mind was too far gone. Besides, I know it's cruel to say, and I hate myself for saying this, If Rory was awake, if he was even semi-conscious to what James is doing to us, he wouldn't be able to stay quiet. He wouldn't be able to hide under a facade, faking taking the pill. No, he would go crazy. I know Rory more than he knows himself. He would attack James and give himself away. And right now, I don't need that. I need to figure out what the hell is wrong with my castmates and get us out of here. Rory is a liability. Him being out of it right now is killing me, but I've got a better chance of getting us out if I work alone. Right now, I don't know the day or the time. It's dark outside, so I guess it's night. Well, I know I've lost days, but I don't know how many. All of my days blur into one, and sometimes I swear they drug me despite me not taking the pill. It must be the food. That's why my head is foggy. My memory's spotty. I've lost all sense of reality and time, and right now, you're all I have. The phone I'm using is stuck on January 1st, so I have no idea what date it is. I don't know how long it's been since I first wrote. All I have is a stream of vague memories which don't make sense to me. I feel like I've been on autopilot, my body and brain working for me while I hang suspended, unable to speak or cry out. It's weird, like an out-of-body experience, like I'm paralyzed, watching another me take over. Well, it was like that until I woke up this morning, my head clear and my thoughts mine again. I've stayed under the radar most of the day, pretending to be in a trance like the others. Now I'm alone, I can finally tell you what's been going on. We were filming last night, all week in fact. Now that's something I do remember. I know my filming schedule in clarity. I know our call times well enough to say them off the top of my head. Well, that's it. I mean, anything regarding my life, anything offset, is totally blank. All I can remember are Katie's lines, Katie's life. I'm 25 years old, and yet all I know is the life of a 17-year-old detective. She's stuck inside my head, and no matter what I do, I can't get her out. My brain feels like it's trudging through maple syrup, struggling to reach cohesive thoughts. My thoughts. Me. Robin. Instead, it's all Katie. Katie Parker, my freaking character. All I can think about is Katie, and I'm scared that I'm losing myself to her. I'm scared we're all losing ourselves. Now, I know something. I'm not sure when it was. It could have been yesterday or a week ago, but I know what I saw, and I know they tried to make me forget. I'll try and explain it the best I can, so prepare for a confusing stream of consciousness, which is me writing everything I remember that happened beforehand. Sorry, my hands are shaking. I'm going to try and tell you everything, but bear with me. I still feel weird. My ears feel like they've been stuffed with cotton wool. I'm thirsty, but if I drink anything, I know I'll be sick. I have to keep pressing backspace because I can't type properly. I've tried to get out of this room, but I'm sealed in. The windows are locked. The only way in and out is the door, which is unlocked by a keycard only James and his guards have. I'm going to write everything out that I remember. My last clear memory is the day after I was taken prisoner. It was a Saturday, but we were due on set to do some reshoots. I was late getting out of bed. My head hurt and I didn't want to face the day. I didn't want to slip back into a reality where I was being held against my will and told I was sick because I wanted to leave the TV show I was sure had crashed and burned. I was teetering on the edge of slumber when James burst in. "Good morning." Rory, who was fast asleep on the bed next to mine, mumbled something in his sleep. His English accent was enough to put a smile on my face, regardless of that situation. It was strange having him as a sort of roommate. I mean, we were good friends, but he was more likely to hang out with Noah than me. Rory had a loud personality and liked to play music well into the night, with Noah and the others, while I preferred a girls' night in with Izzy and Lana. Rory, on the pill though, was a different person, like he'd been body snatched. He wandered around the room like he was in a dream, foggy eyes and a small smile curled on his lips. If I wanted to get anything comprehensible from him, it would either be late night or early morning when the pill had worn off. But even then, it was like talking to myself. He rarely spoke. I tried to speak to him the night before, but it was useless. Even if he wasn't in a trance, he still struggled to focus on me. When I said his name, he'd sit up and frown at me like I was a stranger, before lying back down, forgetting I existed. If he wasn't sleeping, he lay on his back and stared at the ceiling with wide eyes, as if the sickly yellow wallpaper peeling away had the answers to the universe. "Guys," James said with more vigor when none of us responded. When I sat up, trying to blink the sleep from my eyes, James was standing in the doorway, that same triumphant smile plastered on his face. "I've won," his expression screamed. "I've won and you've lost." Now in his hands were the usual, 2 glasses of water and a bag of McDonald's breakfast sandwiches. My mouth watered and my meals were kept scarce. I was allowed 2 a day and was monitored when grabbing a snack from craft services. "Breakfast time," James trilled. His voice might as well have been nails scraping a chalkboard. "We've got a busy day ahead, so I expect your best behavior." Oh, my blood boiled. As much as I wanted to fight back, I couldn't. I couldn't let him know that I was fully sober. So I did as I was told and got out of bed, stationing myself next to Rory, who sat up wide-eyed and slipped off his bed on cue when James cleared his throat. Rory didn't look completely out of it that morning. He shot James a look of disgust when the writer handed him the pill, but he didn't say anything, only swallowing it down with a gulp of water before handing the glass back. His eyes narrowed into slits. I wasn't sure if my castmate was struggling to stay awake or was glaring. Well, I hoped for the latter. James nodded, satisfied. "Open," he murmured, and Rory looked like he might hesitate. It was then when I knew he wasn't all fully there. That would have been the point when he'd launched his fist into James's jaw before grabbing my hand and making a run for it, regardless of the guards. Now, it's been pointed out he's just like his character, reckless, a lovable idiot who'd do anything to save his friends. Rory was his character to a T, but instead of lashing out, he just stared back at the writer, his lips curled as if he wanted to say something, but his words were being suppressed, choked to the back of his throat. The writer cocked his head, a frown curving on his lips. "Did you not hear me, Rory? Are you suffering from hearing loss as well?" Rory shook his head in response, the movement almost robotic, before opening his mouth and sticking his tongue out, showing he had swallowed the pill. It was the kind of behavior I would expect from a kid, and sure, Rory was only 20, and the youngest out of the 5 of us, but James was treating him like a 5-year-old who was acting out. My castmate didn't speak, only bowed his head, and James moved on to me. I took the pill as instructed, popping it into my mouth and shoving it behind my bottom teeth with my tongue. It wasn't the perfect hiding place, and it took practice to lodge the pill where it couldn't be detected, but so far I'd managed to fool him. James handed me the glass of water, and I took a small sip, making sure to swallow hard to emphasize the capsule going down my throat. James leaned in close, and I could smell bacon on his breath, which turned my gut. With every ounce of willpower, I kept a poker face. "Open!" His tone was commanding. I complied and opened my mouth. He did his usual check, and I struggled to remain still and submissive. With him so close, I had the opportunity to smash my head into his mouth. It wouldn't do much, maybe stun him, but it would give us the time we needed to run. And then what? The thought struck me. Izzy, Lana, and Noah were still trapped. If we did get out, who'd believe us? Nobody, I concluded, my eyes starting to sting. They'd agree with James, that we had lost our minds. The show was already a mess, and its stars had finally hit rock bottom. Oh, I could see the headlines, images of our faces popping up everywhere. The cast of the show had lost their goddamn minds and needed to be locked up. Though of course the show would respond by saying we'd been sent to some rehab center in the middle of nowhere, where we could escape the dangers of social media and find ourselves. Which was bullshit, and even if we were sick, our minds truly fucked up by the state of our show, then this place, this shabby hotel on the edge of wherever, it's not a treatment center, it's a prison to keep us until we learn to keep our mouths shut, or miraculously decide to stay on the show of our own free will. "Good girl," James said before gesturing to the food he'd set on the table. "You two should eat. Get washed and dressed and be ready in 15 minutes. We've got Katie and Maxine's to do today." James hurried out quickly, shooting us both a 2-fingered salute. As soon as the door slammed shut, I spat the pill onto my hand and grabbed the glass of water, eager to get the metallic taste out of my mouth. James had left us a bacon sandwich and a medium-sized Coke each. I ate the sandwich and dropped the pill in the soda, letting it disintegrate. Rory gave me a questioning look, but he didn't speak. The pill silences us, so Rory stayed quiet, though I felt his eyes following me as I hurried to get ready. I took a quick shower in the small ensuite provided, and dressed quickly, throwing a sweater over some jeans and dragging a comb through the tangles of my hair. My appearance didn't bother me. That's what the makeup artists were for, ready to turn me into Katie Parker for the day. Looking at myself in the tiny mirror inside the ensuite, I couldn't help notice the shadows under my eyes, and half wondered if there was anyone talented enough to transform me into the sweet-smiling teenage girl I was supposed to be. Oh, the ride to set was silent. There was still no sign of Noah, and I was starting to inwardly panic. I sat in the back of James's car, squashed between Lana and Izzy, with Rory in the passenger seat. They didn't speak a word, all adapting the same glassy-eyed look. I copied them. James nodded along to the radio, often asking us if we wanted to request a song. I spent the car ride staring out of the windows, wondering if there was some way I could knock out James and get control of the wheel. But of course, there were consequences. If I failed, we'd crash. There was nothing discernible to use as a weapon, and if I missed him, I'd reveal myself to be awake. But that didn't stop me thinking of possible positives to the negatives. If we crashed, we could get someone's attention, and I could easily get a hold of the police. Except, was I willing to put my friends' lives at risk to maybe get help? Knowing the answer to that, I ignored the sick feeling in my gut and focused on a plan which was slowly piecing itself together in my head. Noah was nowhere to be seen, so finding him was my top priority. I needed to get back to the hotel so I could look for him, which meant I needed a distraction. Our director, Simon, has emetophobia, the fear of vomiting, so I was going to use that to my advantage. We arrived on set early, and I spent an hour in hair and makeup, being turned into Katie. I had scenes with Izzy that morning, and usually I go to her trailer and rehearse with her. Because of the new rules, however, we had to stay separated, so I headed to craft services to grab a snack. My plan was to stuff as much food in my mouth as possible without it being obvious, and then pretending to barf when the cameras were rolling. Luckily, our producers liked to spoil the crew, so I filled my mouth with caviar and hummus before heading to set. I was confident. I don't know why I was confident when my best friend was standing in front of me, her strawberry blonde hair pulled into a prim ponytail, made-up eyes blinking at me. I tried not to notice the fog in her eyes, the look of confusion I'd seen in Rory's. She played Stella, Katie's best friend. Izzy would usually do voice exercises or get the giggles before filming, but not anymore. My castmate stared back at me, and all I saw was Stella's smile. Stella's teasing eyes. A shiver slid down my spine. The combination of caviar and hummus in my mouth turned sour. It slowly began to dawn on me that Izzy no longer recognized me. The pill we were being fed didn't just suppress and silence us. It rotted away who we were, leaving a submissive shell behind. "Action!" the director yelled, but his voice sounded faded. I couldn't take my eyes off Izzy. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Rory had been looking at me. Like I was a stranger. Burning bile crawled up my throat and I bent over, spitting out the contents of my mouth. Though I wasn't acting, I felt like I was really going to be sick and had to clamp my mouth shut to avoid actually barfing. The director yelled out in exasperated, "Cut!" and James hurried over, shoving Izzy out of the way. "What is it?" he hissed in my face, his expression thunderous. "Are you sick, Robin? Why didn't you say anything?" Part of me was waiting for Izzy to say something like she always did. When I looked up at her, she still had Stella's smile, her warm brown eyes staring straight through me. I could have cried, but instead I forced my emotions deep, deep down. The crew were murmuring behind me. I felt their eyes burning into my back. It wasn't cold, not in the full sunshine, but I was shivering. Keeping my expression nonchalant, I nodded to his first question, and with a heavy sigh, the writer nodded, pursing his lips. He straightened up, addressing the crew. "We can do Katie's scenes later. Let's focus on Max, Stella, and Jules." James grabbed my arm, his leech-like grip eliciting a shriek in the back of my throat. I swallowed it down. "Someone get Robin home, and for goodness sake, get her a Sprite or something. Poor girl looks like she's going to barf again. Are you going to be sick again, or are you finished?" His tone was patronizing, and my cheeks burned with humiliation. I had half a mind to spit in his face. "No," I said softly, making sure my voice was monotone like Rory's. Inclining his head, James nodded. "Do you have a fever? Are you feeling hot?" "No." James let go of me like I really was contagious. "Give her a COVID test just in case." He turned to the crew, running a hand through his hair. "Or maybe I gave her a too strong dose of the first stage of her treatment. She may have had a bad reaction." I should have been concentrating on keeping my expression blank, but my heart was racing. "First stage of treatment," my mind parroted. What did that mean? What was the second stage? As if I was still doped up on the pill, the world seemed to move in a blur around me. I was conscious of changing out of Katie's wardrobe and back into my comfy sweats. There were voices around me, but compared to the ones inside my head, they were white noise. All I could think about were Izzy and Noah and Rory, and what James had said about our so-called treatment. If the pill was the first stage, what was the second? My stomach slithered into my toes. Whatever James was drugging us with had turned my castmates into zombies. If the show wasn't satisfied with that, what were they planning on doing to us next? When time caught up, James was shoving me into the back of his car, dropping a lukewarm can of Sprite on my knee. I didn't dare look up. "It'll settle your stomach," he said, cheerily, before heading to the front to speak to the guard who was chaperoning me. They spoke in hushed murmurs, but I heard them loud and clear. "If there's any trouble of any kind, I want you to call me straight away," James said, his tone like splintering ice, though the guard just scoffed, leaning out of the window. "With Robin?" he laughed. "She doesn't know what planet she's on, Marley. The girl's a blank slate." James didn't laugh. "Just get her back to her room." When we got back to the hotel, the guard took a firm grip of my arm, dragging me into the reception area. After making a show of patting down his pockets, he announced he'd lost the key card for my room. He greeted the clerk, who sent me a wary look before his gaze snapped to the guard. "Key cards are kept downstairs in the office," the clerk said, in a bored-sounding tone. He gestured to an ancient-looking elevator. "Room 305. We took the elevator, which led us to the basement, a narrow hallway with bleach-white walls. The guard stopped outside room 305. "Wait here," he grunted. I nodded, suddenly conscious that I was being left alone, which gave me the perfect opportunity to explore. "Who am I kidding?" Waving a hand in front of my face, the guard chortled. "Of course you'll stay here. Hell, if I asked you to pitch yourself off a bridge, you'd do it without even hesitating." He shook his head. "Marley's one fucked up son of a bitch." Still chuckling to himself, the guard slid into 305, his grip slipping from my arm. "Stay right there, little bird." The door slammed shut behind him, and I forced my shaking legs forward. The hallway looked like it went on forever, doors lined parallel to each other. Lunging into a power walk, I peeked inside each room, pressing my face against the glass. But I was just looking at what looked like storage spaces in abandoned rooms. I was halfway down the corridor, conscious of the guard appearing at any moment, when something flashed in front of my eyes. It took me several disorienting seconds to realize it was coming from one of the doors, specifically 309. Getting closer, the light only got more erratic. When I reached the door, I pressed my face against the glass, peering inside. Room 309 was dark, except the light, which seemed to be emitting from a TV screen. Unable to stop myself, I tried the handle and pushed it down. It was unlocked. There was no sign of the guard, so I let myself inside. Automatically, I found the light switch and clicked it on, but nothing happened. The room stayed dark. 309 was different to the other rooms. The others had been storage spaces illuminated by sickly yellow light, or pitch black. But 309 was only lit up with buzzing static from a TV screen. It reminded me of a doctor's surgery which had been abandoned years ago, everything left to rot away. It was the TV that I couldn't stop staring at. It looked old, ancient even, the type my grandparents had when they were kids. Though looking closer at the screen, it wasn't static I was looking at. There was a kid's cartoon playing. Looney Tunes. I recognized the images. I'd grown up with Cartoon Network's bright colors and high-pitched cartoon screaming from the characters, but, well, this was different. In fact, I'm not even sure it was an episode I was watching. It was black and white, and like the TV, the clip looked like it was at least the late 40s. The characters looked a lot uglier, bulbous and wrong. Compared to what I'd seen when I was a kid, this prehistoric film gave me the shivers. It was the same sequence playing repeatedly, bleeding through struggling static. Bugs Bunny was on screen eating a carrot, while Daffy Duck hit him over the head with a plank of wood. Bugs didn't seem too fazed and continued eating the carrot, while Daffy got progressively more frustrated, slamming it down harder each time. The footage skipped and started again. Bugs eating the carrot, and Daffy sneaking up on him, sporting a devilish grin. I was so captivated by the images flickering on the TV screen I didn't notice movement at the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, but then it happened again, this time accompanied by a scratching noise. Turning away from the TV, I realized I wasn't alone. The tripping static from the television screen illuminated the room fully, and I found myself staring at a shadow, then a human figure sitting in what looked like a dentist's chair. Around them was a room full of gurneys and medical equipment. I started towards them, and the closer I got, the light revealed more. Noah! My castmate was sitting stiff, his wrists strapped to leather armrests. Noah's gaze was glued to the TV screen, his eyes wide and unseeing. With the gutter of my throat, I whispered his name. My castmate didn't respond, and my gaze travelled back to the screen where the sequence was still repeating over and over again, between tripping static. Whatever Noah was being forced to watch, it was doing something to him. I'm going to get you out of here, I managed to choke out. I grabbed his restraints in an attempt to free his wrists, but they were too tight. What do I do? I whispered. I'm here, Noah. What do I do? My attention turned back to the TV, back to Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck. Before I could stop myself, I was stumbling over to the screen and fumbling for an off switch. But even when I pushed buttons and flicked switches with shaking hands, nothing happened. And then I heard tapping. It was barely audible, but in the silence of the room, I heard it. Making my way back to Noah, I noticed his eyes were still stuck to the cartoon. But there was the slightest bit of movement, his fingers under the restraints hitting the armrest. At first I thought it was nothing, but there was a rhythm to the taps. He was sending me a message by stabbing his index into the plush leather of the armrest, and then swiping it across. Now, Noah had always talked about his love for all things puzzles and problem-solving. Of course he'd know how to talk to me without the use of his mouth. I had to be quick. If the guard wasn't on my tail yet, he soon would be. There was no pen and paper available, so I grabbed a roll of tissue paper and a scalpel, inputting each tap and swipe. I used a circle for a tap and a horizontal line for a swipe. When I was done, Noah jolted in the chair, his eyes flickering, mouth opening like it was trying to speak. The TV, which until then had been on mute, started screeching with static, despite the cartoon staying mute. Oh, it seems crazy, but it was like he was reacting to the static, his body tremoring under the restraints. I watched in horror as my castmate's head fell forwards and Noah went limp, like his puppet strings had been severed. When I lifted his head, I caught something drip onto his shirt, a stream of startling crimson dribbling down his chin. I opened my mouth to call for help, but doing that would get me caught. I had no choice. Stuffing the toilet paper with Noah's message into my jeans, I left him, stumbling back out onto the corridor, bile burning in my throat. The guard was waiting for me. A smirk curved on his lips. In his hand was the keycard. "Where'd you fly off to, little bird?" I didn't reply, couldn't reply. All I could think about was Noah. The guard didn't ask questions, which confused me. He took me to my room and locked the door. When I was sure I was alone, I studied Noah's message, trying to make sense of it, but I couldn't. And that's all I remember. I don't remember Rory coming back or James giving me a pill. After that, my memory is blank. Well, they know I saw something, and they tried to make me forget. But they failed. I don't know how they failed, but they failed. Luckily, I'd hidden Noah's message under my mattress, along with the phone. I've tried Google as well as pretty much every way to get help. But the internet doesn't work, so I can't even look up Noah's message. The App Store lets me download apps, but ones like Facebook and Twitter are blocked. All I have is this app. Even so, all I can do is post. If I want to try another subreddit, it won't let me. So, I need your help. Please tell me what Noah was trying to tell me. Look, I'm going to try and post this. Hopefully, if I'm clear-headed enough. I feel like I'm going crazy, like what I saw was some kind of hallucination. Did I see right? I know I did. I'm going to try and update you as soon as I can. I can hear footsteps now, so I have to go. If they take me, I pray Rory finds this and continues to tell our story. Oh, small update. I've learned the date. I've lost so many days, and every single one of them is blank. Anything could have happened to me, but I feel okay. That's good, right? I had scenes with Noah earlier. He seems normal, but I haven't spoke to him as Robin, only as my character. Oh, and Rory called me Katie this morning, and his English accent is gone. Is it crazy to think that, well, that he's becoming his character? Part 3. I'm running out of time. Well, now I'm terrified out of my mind, and I don't know what to do right now. The good news is I've managed to find an internet connection within the confines of this hotel. However, every way of getting help is still blocked. So once again, I'm coming to you. This time it's not just to give you an update, but also to ask you for help. I don't have to find a connection on set anymore, which is a relief, and hopefully I can post this today. Thankfully, I now have at least some kind of hold on the date. Once learning it last time, I made sure to input it into this phone, so I can make sure to anchor myself to some kind of normal. Since I last posted, I've managed to stay myself, though at this point I don't even know what that means. I'm clear-headed at least, and my thoughts are my own, which right now is precious to me. I'm desperate to stay myself, to stay sane, because every minute that goes by, I'm struggling to hold on to reality. I'm struggling to accept this is my life right now. It's not a TV show or a movie or some overpriced book you might get at Barnes & Noble. No, this is really happening to me, and if I'm honest, I'm freaking terrified. Sorry, once again, I can't stop shaking, so the following account may contain typos and whatnot. I really don't care. I'm just going to write down everything I know. Oh, due to the virus, our filming schedule is all over the place right now, which means we film on weekends too, mostly reshoots. I know if my castmates and I weren't being drugged and turned into emotionless zombies, we'd definitely complain, but as you know, they're not themselves right now. And no matter how much I'm in denial, neither am I. Anyway, this morning we were due on set. Last night I couldn't sleep. After seeing Noah's message, my thoughts wouldn't shut up. I kept thinking about him trapped in that room, strapped down like an animal. The cartoon that he was being forced to watch and the scarlet rush of blood dribbling down his chin. Everything I saw felt like some kind of vivid hallucination, especially after seeing him every day since. Sure, Noah only spoke to me as Katie, and only on set, but he seemed like his usual self, even if he was acting. Noah plays Katie's love interest, Will, on the show, and the two of them are practically the same person, so apart from the all-too-familiar foggy eyes that looked straight through me, like everyone else, Noah didn't seem like anything drastic had been done to him, which I was sure of when I'd seen him in room 309, staring blankly at some ancient Looney Tunes cartoon, where the static seemed to control him. No, I was not imagining it. I saw it with my own eyes. Noah, his body trembling, quivering under tough restraints. It looked like he was having a seizure. His wide eyes and parted lips still haunt my memory. He was silently screaming at me for help. I couldn't do anything, only watching as a seemingly innocent cartoon caused him to writhe, blood spilling down his shirt. And that's what I can't understand. If I'd seen that, if I'd witnessed Noah go through that trauma, what had they done to him? Brainwashing seemed like the best guess, but it seemed like more than that. James had spoken of a first stage of treatment, which was the pill. Whatever had happened to Noah, that must have been the second. Is there a third? How many stages are there, and where does it end? What the hell is James planning? However, even if Noah was more or less acting like himself, his message to me was haunting my thoughts. Find Derek. What could that mean? Well, Derek was one of our producers and writers, as well as James's brother. Now, according to James, he'd left the show due to creative differences. After everything that's happened over the last few weeks, I know that's a lie, but why would Noah tell me to find Derek? As far as I knew, the two of them were only close as colleagues. Derek seems like the last person Noah will go to for help, so why did he seem desperate for me to find him? My character Katie was obsessed with mysteries and let them rule her life. And I started to wonder if she really was starting to take over me, because part of me, splintered pieces of me deep down, couldn't stop thinking about the bobby pin on my bedside cupboard, and if sticking it in the lock and jimming it a little would unlock the damn thing. But then I came back to reality, and quickly realized that the door to my room was locked by a keycard, not a key. But Katie, her ghostly presence skating the back of my thoughts, still wouldn't shut up. She was thinking of every escape attempt possible, and it was hard to block her out. After playing her non-stop, it felt like the character was slowly bleeding into me, every part of her spider webbing into my brain, leeching on. So, why Derek? I wondered, pushing Katie out. Why did Noah want me to find James's brother, and where was he anyway? It didn't make any sense, and overthinking it just hurt my head. I was lying on my back, staring at the ceiling, trying to force overpowering thoughts to the back of my head, when I heard it. Buzzing. Well, at first I thought an insect had flown in. I sat up in bed, blinking in the darkness. Leaning over to switch the table lamp on, the room flooded with light, but after several disorienting seconds of searching for a fly, there was nothing there. Except I now heard it. Burrowing under the thin blankets provided, I tried to sleep. But it was still there, a buzzing noise that was getting progressively more erratic. I checked the lamp to see if it was the bulb, but the buzzing noise wasn't coming from anywhere near me. Again I tried to force my brain to sleep, but the noise progressed from buzzing to a seemingly relentless swarm burying its way into my brain. I couldn't take it. Slipping out of bed and on shaky legs, I scanned the room. It was definitely an insect, I thought. Maybe it was trapped. The clock on the bedside read 1 a.m., glaring red numbers burning into my eyes. After stumbling around, looking for an invisible insect, I gave up on my side and fell to my knees beside Rory's bed, ducking underneath to check. Rory had been worrying me the most, after completely losing his English accent in favour of the more broad American twang, just like the one he fakes to play Mac. I used to see him slipping in and out of English and American when we were shooting before all of this, where he would usually break into his English twang when he broke out into laughter or misread his lines. But now he spoke purely in an American accent. It shouldn't have, but it chilled me to the bone, like I was losing him to Mac. I knew James planned to silence us and turn us into zombies, but this was something else. As usual, Rory was fast asleep, curled into himself. I made sure not to wake him up, staying as quiet as possible, but the closer I got to my castmate, the more the buzzing rattling in my ears grew louder, and my heart dropped into my stomach. Slowly getting up, I leaned close to Rory. His eyes were shut, lips parted peacefully. I had to know. Getting as close as I could, his warm breath grazed my cheeks as I pressed my ear to the side of his head. The buzzing noise collapsed into a low humming. It sounds crazy, but it sounded like there was something there, inside his head, like a swarm of bees had nested in his skull. I jumped back, swallowing a shriek, and slipped back into bed, struggling to hold down a panic attack. I spent hours trying to find a logical explanation to what I'd heard, but I couldn't. The noise stopped eventually, leaving me to bask in the silence. But silence was worse. I wanted it back, so I could understand it, so I could make sure I wasn't losing my freaking mind. Before I knew it, early morning sunlight was streaming through the blinds, and I'd had next to no sleep. When I was teetering on the edge of slumber, my brain would remind me of Noah convulsing under restraints, blood spattered down his shirt, Izzy and her vacant eyes burning right through me, and the angry buzzing sound emitting directly from Rory's head. I cried myself to sleep, managing a mediocre 1.5 hours. I dreamed of clusters of bees feasting on my fleshy brain tissue, burrowing directly into my skull, the buzzing noise becoming screeching static, streaming its way inside of me. Rory's voice pulled me back to reality, and I opened my eyes to find him standing over me. Rory's smile is something that keeps me sane. Before falling under the spell of the pill, there were rare moments when he would flash me a reassuring grin, even when I knew he was breaking apart inside. His larger-than-life personality was something I treasured, and when I blinked up at him, struggling to keep my eyes open, all I could see was Mac. All I could see was his character. His expression was blank, brown eyes glued to me, except I wasn't seeing the lovable idiot I normally saw in both fictional Mac and real Rory. Instead, I was seeing an emotionless shell with my friend's face. The buzzing noise was gone, and once again I had to remind myself it was real. It had been real. I had heard it, and everything I was seeing and hearing wasn't a figment of my imagination. Even if my mind was struggling, stretching to find logical answers. "Get up!" Rory's voice sent shivers slipping down my spine, Mac's American accent dominating his tone. He didn't smile, only inclining his head to the side, like he was looking at a stranger. His arms were folded across a thin, short-sleeved shirt he was using for pajamas. My castmate jutted his chin. "We have school." For a second, my guard was down, the facade I'd managed to keep crumbling. "School?" I questioned him, choking back the fear in my tone. "Of course, Robin." James's voice trilled, filling my blood with ice. It was like an electric shock. I twisted around to face him, fashioning my expression back to vacant. Luckily, the writer didn't seem to notice. He was standing on the threshold with the usual 2 white plastic cups of water and a paper brown bag of McDonald's breakfast. After weeks of being mindless and having the same routine, it was starting to take its toll on me. It was monotonous, and I was sick of the same bacon sandwich which tasted like cardboard, the same lukewarm fizz of Coke slithering down my sandpaper throat. The thought of popping the pill into my mouth made me feel physically sick, but I kept a nonchalant face as James took a step towards us. Rory, as usual, stood still, his arms by his sides, staring forwards like a soldier awaiting orders. I copied him, mentally begging the boy not to speak. I wanted my castmate that morning. I wanted Rory's familiar accent and venomous mouth, like that first morning. I wanted him to rebel in some way, spitting swears at James like he was still holding on, like he was still with me, and I wasn't alone. Except the Rory I knew was gone, and I had to come to terms with that behind my facade. James cleared his throat. "Good morning to the two of you." Rory nodded, and I did too, making sure to pinpoint my glassy eyes directly at the writer. We did the usual, handing us the capsules, watching us take them and checking if we'd actually swallowed. I lodged my pill between my teeth and waited in tense silence while James started going through our schedules for the day. "Okay, we have a script reading for this morning, for episode 6, which is, of course, the episode when..." The writer's voice faded out in my ears, reduced to a low mumbling barely scathing the back of my consciousness. I only heard "script meeting," and something inside me ignited, an idea slowly piecing itself together in my mind. It's now rare when we go to the writing offices. We haven't been since the start of the season, when everything went to shit. All I could think about was Noah's message. Derek left the show, but his office was in the building. Oh, if I managed to get in, there would no doubt be answers in there. "Robin, does that sound okay?" Snapping out of my thoughts quickly, I gave James a curt nod, despite having no idea what I was saying yes to. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, before he broke out into a grin. "Wonderful. Now, open, sweetie. I want to make sure you're being a good girl." His words made my skin crawl. All I wanted to do was wipe that triumphant grin off his face, but, well, doing so would expose me. So I stepped forward obediently, hating how familiar my body was with his voice, eager to submit to him. Opening my mouth, I stayed still, maintaining my blank expression. Though James only checked quickly before pulling away, confident I'd swallowed. "All right." He clapped his hands together and gestured to the food. "A car will be waiting for you in 15 minutes. Eat and get ready, and then we'll head to the writing offices. We've got a lot to do today, so hurry up." With a cheerful, almost dance to the door, James disappeared quickly, whistling to himself. When he was gone, I spat out the pill as usual, dumping it in the Coke. After forcing myself to eat the sandwich, I showered and dressed, formulating a plan in my mind. Before the script meeting, I was going to break into Derek's office. Thankfully, it's spaced out from the other writing rooms on the top floor, while the others are below. I knew that faking sickness wasn't going to cut it after the last time. As far as I knew, James did expect at least a flicker of humanity inside of us. A few days ago, Lana had asked to go to the bathroom. I knew she was completely under the pill's control, but still asked. James nodded, seemingly unfazed by my castmate speaking out of turn. So that's what I was going to try. Dressing in a sweater and jeans, I grabbed a leather jacket that had been left out for me. Rory was still on my mind, as well as Noah's message. James expected us both to be waiting side by side when he came to collect us, and when I stationed myself next to my castmate, I leaned into him, listening out for the buzzing. But it was gone. Part of me wanted to grab Rory and shake him, attempt to snap him out of it. Before I could, James arrived, this time with the others in tow. We followed him like the obedient drones he'd turned us into. Noah and Izzy were shoulder to shoulder, Rory and I, and Lana bringing up the rear. Something burned inside of me, an overwhelming urge to talk to them. Try and knock some sense into them. I wanted to drag Noah to the side and question him about Derek. I knew that was fruitless, though. I was the only one awake, like always. The others were trapped in some impenetrable trance while my mind was full of clarity. The car ride to the writing offices was the same as always. I sat in the same seat, I listened to the same radio station crackling through James's expensive speakers, pretending to listen when he went through our schedule for the 4th time. It always struck me how trapped I truly was when I turned my head and stared out of the window. Life seemed to go on as normal outside, while mine crumpled in front of my very eyes. We drove past ordinary people, some of whom probably knew our characters and had no idea about the truth behind us, that I was a prisoner of the show. Refusing to let myself slip into bitter melancholy, I fought to stay awake. My mind was working at 100 miles an hour, and a clash of aromas and overwhelming whiff of perfume and cologne from my castmates turned my stomach. We arrived at the writing offices and were escorted inside by James and 2 guards. The whole way there I was struggling to think of the perfect excuse to break away from the group. I stuck to Noah's side, finding comfort in his company, even if he wasn't all there. He stared forwards, unblinking, an unsettling smile on his lips. The crew were buzzing around, talking animatedly, and I caught looks thrown our way, pursed lips and slitted eyes. I stayed stock still, watching James swipe his keycard in the door and push it open, but my mind was whirring, my stomach collapsing on itself. My castmates stood together, blank eyes and unsmiling lips, bar Noah, and I quickly came to the realization that the looks from the crew, they looked, well, unnerved. The 5 of us were freaking them out. There, James, with his usual smile, widened the door and ushered us in. When the others took their seats silently, I hesitated in the doorway. The room was far too warm and my skin prickled with heat. The table was already set up with multicolored scripts and glasses of water. Glimpsing a slip of paper with my name designating my seat, I got a crippling wave of déjà vu from our last meeting. Before James had entered, Noah had put Rory into a teasing chokehold, Izzy slapping at him to let the boy go, Lana rolling her eyes and smirking at her phone. Looking at them now, though, they were strangers, and it hurt. It fucking hurt that I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor, waves of emotion hitting me like waves of ice water. Robin! James's voice sounded like it was underwater. Instead, I was seeing myself handing my phone over to James. My phone. My chest clenched, bile burning the back of my throat. I'd become so used to living like a prisoner, like a submissive doll, I'd almost forgotten what it was like to live normally. And I had. In this room just weeks ago, I'd had the luxury of staring down at my phone when James was interrogating me, clutching it to my chest and making a note to myself that I had to call Mum at some point. I never had. There was probably someone texting her for me to avoid her getting suspicious. Robin! James's hiss of my name made me inwardly jump, my stomach slithering into my toes. My eyes were burning with tears. I felt like I was drowning. Nodding my head in acknowledgement, I blinked at James blankly, hoping to God I wasn't showing any emotion. Is something wrong? James's eyes were sharp. My throat was dry. Yes, I responded, copying the other's almost robotic tone. Can I use the bathroom? The writer's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. Of course. Should we start without you? I didn't move, even when my legs urged me to get the hell out of there. James's gaze didn't leave me. His lips curved into a smirk. He was testing to see if I was going to answer. On the pill, we're supposed to be silent unless we have a command or are spoken to. So, I didn't answer, making sure to hold eye contact despite my pounding heart. After an uncomfortable moment, James shook his head. Go, he muttered, gesturing to the doorway. You look a little peaky, so take as long as you like. His smile only broadened, and without missing a beat, I hurried out of the door, only for him to slam it behind me. Right, he said from inside. His voice had the tone of a schoolteacher. Let's begin with Mac and Stella, shall we? To my surprise, there were no guards on the hallway, and I found myself staring at the exit doors. Escape. I could run and not stop running until I'd found someone who could help me. When I weaved the scenario in my head, however, I knew I'd only get blank looks and rolled eyes from strangers. They'll think I've lost my mind, I thought, backing away and heading towards the stairs, which meant the only way I was going to help myself and the others was delving into Derek's office. Taking 3 steps at a time, I headed to the top floor. Still no guards, which was weird. When I wrapped my hand around the bronze handle to Derek's office, it clicked and slid open. After twisting around and searching for pursuers, I stepped inside, shutting and locking the door behind me. The second I strode into the writer's office, I knew there'd been some kind of struggle. Derek Marley was a neat person compared to his brother, and every time I'd visited before, everything would be in perfect order on his desk, scripts and filming schedules in color-coded piles. Instead, what I was faced with was chaos. Derek's desk was upturned, an explosion of paper piled on the floor. His MacBook was on its side in a pool of what looked like old invoices. I froze in the doorway before picking through the pile of Derek's belongings. There was definitely a struggle. My character seemed to come to life inside my mind, pointing out the obvious. A mug of coffee on the carpet, its contents spilled and long since dried into it. A black pair of glasses were under the desk, the lenses smashed. Someone had stamped on them. The laptop looked like it had survived the attack, so I grabbed it, setting the MacBook on the floor. The screen lit up when I pressed the power button, and I let out a sharp breath of relief. When I was kneeling down, inspecting the laptop screen, something caught my eye, a glimmer of silver underneath Derek's plush leather chair. I reached for it, my fingers curling under something cylindrical and narrow. A syringe. Not just that. Something was wrapped around the plastic. With shaking hands, I unraveled a handwritten letter. The syringe was labeled Severodol, 100 milligrams. But right then I was captivated by the letter. The handwriting was unmistakably Derek's shorthand. It shouldn't have surprised me, considering Noah's message, but seeing my castmate's name heading the letter sent me into a cold sweat. Noah, I'm sorry I can't help you. I know how much you want out, but I'm telling you, releasing this to the public will be your downfall, especially through my Instagram account. I spoke to my brother, and after many disagreements, I've come to the decision that he is not well. He's not thinking straight. Now, this year has been cruel to us, as you know. Due to the pandemic and holding production back in March, I'm afraid James has become driven to, keep the show on air and will do anything to make sure it does. I have a confession to make. I've written this letter multiple times, unsure of how I'm going to tell you this because I've made many mistakes. Those of which you will never forgive me for. I can't pin all of this on my brother. This project is ours, and I'm not going to deny being involved. Now, if you're reading this, and I've not managed to tell you in person, it means something's happened to me. But don't worry about me. I'll be fine. What I need you to do, boy, is focus on what I'm going to tell you. On my laptop are details of the horrific plans my brother and the network combined have for you, Isabel, Rory, Lana, and Robin. He's convinced that you're sick for wanting to leave, and is willing to do anything in his power to keep the 5 of you on the show. Though I have my suspicions, he's been wanting to do this for a while. I couldn't participate in it fully. Admittedly, I did agree to the beginning stages. I wanted discipline and compliance with the 5 of you, since we're approaching a rough stretch of months, but, well, the later stages are where I draw the line. My brother's trying to play God, and I want no part in his sick activities. The master password to my laptop is Delta 6785-1245. Click on the folder named Project Daffodil. You'll find all details there. I just hope you find this before my brother begins the later stages. Tonight he's planning to begin stage 1. If he ever reaches the harrowing phases, use the shot and remember, time is your worst enemy. You cannot let my brother reach stage 4. Be safe, all of you. Everyone here is against you. You were right, Noah. The show has lost its heart. James has turned it into a money-making machine. I'm deeply sorry that what started as a passion project between us all has reached these lows. Oh, do not go to the police. There are people far higher up than my brother who want to see this project through to the end. My brother's treating it like an experiment, and right now, you are his guinea pigs. Make no mistake. If you do get away from James, you will not be free. The show owns all of you. The police will send you back to my brother. You'll also find the contact details of a friend of mine you can trust. She can get you out of there into a safe location, but you need to be careful. Again, I'm so sorry. To all of you, my sins will haunt me for the rest of my life. Derek. I didn't have time to go over what I'd read, but it was enough to send me into fight or flight. With trembling hands, I stabbed in Derek's password, and the Galaxy background flashed up. The battery was almost dead, so I had to be quick. Following the instructions in the letter, I scanned the massive folders scattered on the desktop, clicking into one named Project Daffodil, and was prompted with the password. I typed in the same one, and after staring at the rainbow wheel spin around, a box popped up with columns of folders. The top folder was the name of our show, followed by our names in alphabetical order. Lana Faraday, success. Rory Gallagher, success. Robin Harley, to be decided. Noah Keating, success. Isabel Wright, success. TBD. My mind was whirring. To be determined, meaning whatever had been done to the others was yet to be done on me. While the other names were highlighted light green, my name was a much darker orange. I felt sick. I wanted to shut the laptop and run. I didn't know where I was going to go, but I had to get away. Sometimes being blissfully ignorant was a good thing, but I knew I had to see what Daffodil was. I had to know what they were doing to my castmates. I started with Noah, clicking onto his name. A list of .mov files appeared, and I clicked into the first one, bringing up QuickTime Player. It was a video clip lasting 8 minutes, though I didn't have to press play to understand what I was watching. I found myself staring at the same room I'd seen Noah in, this time flooded with dizzying white light. This time he was in a reclined position, his eyes closed, a plastic mask pressed over his face. Noah's eyes were an angry red, and I glimpsed what looked like bandages wrapped around his ear. It was what was beside the chair that sent my heart into a frenzy. A silver contraption which looked straight out of Doctor Who. Unable to stop myself, I went back to a list of names, this time clicking on Rory's name, bringing up the same player. The same background, clinical white light bathing his face. Like Noah, Rory's eyes were shut, a mask pressed over his nose and mouth. His wrists were strapped to leather armrests, and seatbelt-like restraints pinning him to the chair. Rory's right eye looked swollen, just like Noah's. Clicking play, I dragged the video forward. When it started playing again, Rory's eyes were blinking open, staring dazedly at the camera. A voice played through the speakers, and I jumped. James's voice. "Insertion successful. Give me a moment to talk to the young man." Rory's eyes widened, his gaze flicking around the room. He gave a half-hearted tug on the restraints. His pupils looked dilated and foggy, but he looked alert, awake. The mask had been removed, and for a moment he looked like he was struggling to speak. "What?" Rory slurred, his English accent coming out full pelt. "What's going on?" James chuckled, his laugh sputtering into static through the speaker. "The date is the 1st of October, 2020, and the time is 8 minutes past 10, he said before clearing his throat. "How are you feeling?" Rory grunted. "Like I've been hit over the head. What?" He licked his lips, shaking his head. "What did you do to me?" "Your sickness, young man. We're simply treating your sickness. Now, state your name." Rory tugged at the restraints, pinning his wrists to the armrests. "I'm not sick, arsehole." "I'm not going to repeat myself." James's tone hardened. "State your name." "I can't move." Rory struggled in the restraints, hissing in pain when he twisted his head to yank at them. "Why can't I move?" your full name, please? James said breezily. For documentation purposes. Rory Gallagher, Rory snapped, lips curling into a snarl. What the fuck is this? Your age and occupation too, please. What? Glaring at the camera now, Rory blinked rapidly. I'm 19. No, I'm 20. I'm an actor. Very good. James's voice was grating, patronizing. Once again for me? There's a good boy. You son of a bitch, Rory gritted out. What the fuck did you do to me? Where are the others? I caught a stray tear dribble down his cheek. Rory's voice was shaking, even if he was putting on a front. I want to go home. I want out. Do you hear me? The others aren't important, James hummed. Once again, please. Rory's jaw clenched and he looked like he might start yelling, squirming in the restraints. But an ear-piercing screech sounded out and I recognized it automatically. The static from the cartoon. I expected Rory to start convulsing like Noah, but the boy just flopped down, his expression going slack, his arms slamming down on the armrests. Your name, James said, a hint of delight in his tone. Nice and clear for me. My castmate's eyes were open, but there was nothing there. It was exactly what I'd been seeing for weeks now. The same glassy eyes, a void of nothing through warm browns. Mac. The American accent came out natural and fluent, bleeding into the name. Mac Pry. Age? James prompted. Rory didn't blink. 16. The writer was practically laughing with glee. Occupation? High school student, Rory droned. Wonderful, James trilled. Simply wonderful. He was talking to somebody else. Give him a few weeks to settle in and then we can move on to the final stage. Complete removal of lingering consciousness. Of course, we can replicate the young man's personality easily for press days and, of course, the fans. That'll be easy. Once the chip is stable, there'll be no need for the boy. He cleared his throat. He'll be disposed of. Do you understand me? Another voice, one I didn't recognize, though my ears were roaring. Yes, sir, the voice murmured. I'll need to keep an eye on him for a few hours. Make sure the device is connected to the iris. We don't want a repeat of what happened with Mr. Keaton. He's stabilized. Miss Harley's been taken care of? It's hidden in plain sight, Molly. For that, I must applaud you. James chuckled. That was all my brother, Dr. Jason. He's the smart one after all. Something turned in my gut, and I lurched back, choking up the sandwich I'd eaten earlier. But I didn't have the luxury of barfing my insides out. I had to get the information I needed and get out of there. I didn't need to watch anymore. Shutting down the clips and then the following windows, I searched for Derek's emergency contact. Scanning through the files in the Project Daffodil folder was fruitless, but a blank folder caught my eye. Clinking into it, there was a name, address, and number. Looking around, my gaze lingered on a scalpel sticking from the pile of papers. I had to get it out. That's all I could think of. Whatever the hell was inside that eye, I had to get it out. I grabbed the scalpel, slipping it into my right boot. I shoved the syringe and Derek's letter into my jeans, grabbed a pen, scribbling down the details, and got out of there, fast, wiping bile off my chin with the cuff of my sweater. I could barely breathe and my fingers kept grazing my right eye. James's words wouldn't leave my head as I stumbled down each step. Felt like I was floating on air. James was turning us into our characters, and had succeeded with everyone but me. Not just that, he was planning on eradicating lingering consciousness. That meant fully removing them, right? In favor of whatever he's replaced them with. When I got back to the script read-through, James took one look at my ashen cheeks and the bile staining my sweater and nodded, gesturing for me to sit down without questioning me. The meeting didn't feel real. Nothing felt real. My mouth worked, but they were words James wanted me to say. I ran through my script as Katie, making sure to come to life as her when allocated, and when the read-through was over, I let the writer pull me back to the car, shoving me inside. I felt paralyzed. Knowing what was going on and what his plans were for us, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We drove back to the hotel in silence, and Rory and I were taken back to our room as usual. But this time a television screen was rolled in, the same type I'd seen in 309. "Sit down, both of you," James commanded, and Rory did so. After a beat, I did too. A man came in and set up the TV, inserting what looked like a VCR into an ancient player. The same black and white cartoon popped up onto the screen, flicking through static. Rory's gaze went directly to the screen, and the writer nodded with a smile. "That's right, Mr. Gallagher." I did the usual, copying Rory, but James came to kneel in front of me. He grabbed my chin and jerked my head forwards. His eyes were hard and merciless. Inclining his head, he hummed. "You're not quite ready yet, Robin," he hummed. "Your mind is far too sensitive, young lady." Part of me wanted to question him, choking out tangled cries in the back of my throat. Instead, I stayed still. I held my breath, swallowing a screech. James's grip hardened. In my peripheral, Bugs Bunny was chewing the same carrot, and Daffy Duck advancing towards him. "You're a stubborn little bitch, aren't you, eh?" The writer stood up, seemingly composing himself. "Anyway, here's some late-night entertainment for you both." His eyes flickered to me. "Hopefully this will stabilize you, sweetie," he pouted. "I don't want to risk losing my best star, after all." With a cheery wave, James left. But the door didn't shut. It bounced before hitting the frame. Retreating footsteps told me the writer hadn't noticed. Jumping up, I grabbed one of the paperbacks James had provided for me for entertainment, and I wedged it under the door. Failing to switch the TV off, I grabbed the table it was on and turned it around, and Rory blinked, his gaze wandering, like he was searching for it. "Rory!" Kneeling in front of the boy, I grabbed his shoulders and shook him, but he was limp like a doll. His eyes were glassy and vacant, staring at the TV screen. "Hey!" My voice was teetering on the edge of hysterics, and I slapped him hard. "Rory, look at me!" My voice wobbled. "Hey, look at me!" But he wasn't looking at me. He wasn't fucking looking at me, and I wondered if he was already Mac, if Rory was gone. I couldn't stop myself. Grabbing the lamp from the bedside table, I slammed it into the back.